Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping right into the really heated discussions happening around U.S.-China trade relations, tariffs, and, well, all the economic and geopolitical stuff that goes with it.
Yeah, and a lot of this has been stirred up by some recent online commentary, particularly some analysis from a video featuring Tom Bilyeu that we looked at.
Exactly. We're drawing from various sources, but mainly a pretty detailed online discussion that digs into these exact topics: trade, tariffs, global events.
Right, and our goal really is to pull out the most important bits for you. We want to sift through the different perspectives on these pretty complex issues.
Give you some clarity, some context without making your head spin. Okay, so let's start with Trump and the China tariffs. Feels like the story's shifted a bit recently, hasn't it?
It really has. I mean, initially the talk was intense, tariffs maybe as high as 145%.
Which sounds huge. But then more recently, we've heard Trump himself kind of suggesting those really high rates probably not happening.
Yeah, he sort of walked it back. So what's going on there? Is it a negotiating tactic?
That's the big question, isn't it? Is this classic art of the deal stuff? Throw out something outrageous, create chaos, then step in with structure and get a better deal.
That's one way to look at it. He certainly talks about that kind of approach in his book, Create Uncertainty, Make the Other Side Uncomfortable.
Or is it simpler? Maybe just a realization that those kinds of tariffs could seriously backfire on the economy.
Could be. We definitely saw a noticeable softening in the aggressive talk, not just from Trump, but Scott Bessant, too, who was also mentioned in the
A
discussion.
gradual downgrade of aggression, as someone put it.
And you have to remember the market reaction to the initial threats. Markets sold off, treasury yields dropped.
Right. That drop in yield shows investors getting nervous, looking for safer places for their money, like government bonds. Classic risk-off move.
Exactly. Markets don't like that level of uncertainty. It's like a real-time poll on the potential economic damage.
So how did China react to all this pressure? It doesn't seem like they immediately ran back to the negotiating table.
No, not at all. The reports we saw suggest they're basically saying no talks right now. The U.S. has to make the first move.
Which makes you wonder, did Trump expect that? Did he think they would just come running back? Or was this part of the plan?
It's hard to say for sure. The discussion we reviewed hinted that maybe China not immediately engaging was factored in somehow. A more complex game, perhaps.
And meanwhile, China's definitely not just sitting still, are they?
No, they're actively making deals elsewhere. Vietnam, South Korea, Japan. There was even mention of another South Asian country. They're building other partnerships.
Diversifying, not putting all their eggs in the U.S. basket. It highlights that global competition, doesn't it?
Absolutely, it's a multipolar world, and they're playing that game.
Thinking about negotiations, someone in our source material made a really interesting point about needing an off-ramp.
Yes, for both sides. That's crucial in any big negotiation, right?
But
Referencing the Russia-Ukraine situation as a parallel.
exactly. Both sides need to be able to sell the outcome back home, make it look like, if not a win, then at least not a total loss. Otherwise, it's just politically impossible.
It's that blend of international strategy and domestic politics. Always tricky.
Then there was Scott Bessant's view on China's economy.
Right, he apparently thinks their current path just isn't sustainable. The implication being they actually need a deal with the U.S., maybe just as much as the U.S. might want one.
That adds another wrinkle. If both sides need a deal.
Well, you'd think that would push them towards finding one. But then again, there are counter-arguments, right? About China's state control, their long-term planning, their resilience. Is the unsustainable claim universally accepted? Probably not.
Good point. It highlights how, zooming out, there are just such different ways people are reading Trump's whole strategy.
Totally. Is he a strategic mastermind playing 4D chess, or is it just chaotic and reckless?
Our source material talked about building mental models to try and figure things out. You make a prediction based on your model, see what happens, and then, adjust your model.
Which is kind of what we aim for here, isn't it? Trying to map out cause and effect without being on Team A or Team B.
Right. There's that cool analogy, the Big Dipper. It's a useful pattern we see in the stars, helps us navigate, but it's not really a jipper. It's a construct we impose.
Yeah, useful fiction sometimes. And that idea of strong convictions loosely held, have a viewpoint, but be ready to ditch it if the facts change.
Which seems important right now. The source also mentioned the populist mood, possibly driven by things like high debt, income inequality.
That's a really critical backdrop. Populism often shakes up established norms, including trade policy. Domestic anxieties definitely spill over into international relations.
And someone compared Trump's approach to entrepreneurial risk-taking. High potential upside, but also high potential for things to go sideways.
Yeah, the risk of destabilization is real. Is it calculated chaos or just chaos? That Tesseract chess versus shoot me in the ear bro comparison was pretty vivid.
Could you explain Tesseract chess a bit more for us?
Sure. Think of it like multi-dimensional chess.
Ah,
Super complex, planning many moves ahead across different layers. The opposite of just a reactive, impulsive move with unforeseen, possibly terrible consequences, the shoot me in the ear end of the spectrum.
got it. Which leads to the role of experts.
Yeah.
Ray Dalio's definition was mentioned someone who's done the thing successfully 3 times.
Right, but the point wasn't just to blindly follow experts. It was about evaluating their reasoning.
The logic, the cause and effect chain they lay out, that's what matters. More than just the credentials. Experts might map it faster, but you still need to think critically.
Exactly. Analyze the argument itself.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Remember the Doge initiative.
Ah, yes. The plan to slash, what was it, $1 trillion in government waste with Elon Musk involved?
Right, Musk, often called, a master capital allocator in business, but the results seem underwhelming so far.
Yeah. The source said they'd found about $160 billion in savings identified, a long way from $1 trillion. And with Musk apparently stepping back.
It seems less likely they'll hit that huge target.
Yeah.
It kind of raises questions about applying business thinking directly to government, doesn't it?
It really does. The scale, the rules, the incentives, they're just so different. It's often not a simple transfer of skills. You have to consider the incentives and potential biases of everyone involved, too.
Makes sense. Now, for a quick history lesson that popped up in the source, a tweet about an America First rally back in 1941.
Right. Protesting the U.S. getting into World War II against Nazi Germany, Charles Lindbergh, the famous pilot, was a key figure.
His view was that England was losing and should just make peace with Hitler. It's kind of startling to look back, isn't it?
It really is, and it draws parallels to today's debates about intervention versus isolation, like with Ukraine. It shows how uncertain the future always looks at the time, and how these debates aren't new.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the U.S. role globally. The source stressed the America First idea, prioritizing our own interests.
Focusing on domestic problems, debt, economic reliance on others, manufacturing control, things like that.
And speaking of Ukraine, the source material highlighted some really sharply conflicting views.
Definitely. There was one assertion mentioned that Zelensky started the war, which was immediately countered as crazy, inaccurate, absurd, shows how polarized the narratives are.
And it touched on Trump's view of Zelensky, maybe feeling there was some entitlement regarding aid requests.
But setting aside those specific contested claims, the broader strategic point seemed to be that the real long-term challenge for the U.S. is China.
The Thucydides trap.
Yeah.
The rising power versus the established power, that dynamic.
Exactly. And the related point was that maybe Europe needs to take more ownership of the Russia-Ukraine situation, increase their own military spending.
Let Europe handle Europe more,
Mhm.
while the U.S. focuses on the bigger Pacific challenge.
That seemed to be the implication, along with the idea of the U.S. promoting peace through strength.
There's also that interesting detail about how aid is given to Ukraine, sending older weapon systems rather than just writing checks.
Right, which ties into U.S. manufacturing capacity. The comparison to China's shipbuilding capabilities was pretty stark there. It really highlights a shift in global industrial power.
But the source also strongly emphasized Ukrainian sovereignty, pushing back against any rhetoric that minimizes it.
Yes, that point was clearly made. It wasn't just about geopolitics, but also about the principle of sovereignty.
Okay, let's talk demographics. Big topic. Declining birth rates in developed nations, this idea of a demographic catastrophe.
Yeah, it's a huge concern in many places. And Trump's proposed solution, mentioned in the source, a $5,000 baby bonus.
But does that really work? The source questioned if $5,000 actually tackles the reasons people aren't having kids, like housing costs, general economic stress, maybe income inequality.
It seems like a bit of a Band-Aid, perhaps. I mean, research on these kinds of cash incentives is pretty mixed. Sometimes you get a small bump, but it often doesn't change the long-term trend if the underlying issues aren't addressed.
Like what France does, maybe. More comprehensive support childcare, leave policies.
Exactly. Those seem to have a more sustained impact than just a one-off cash payment. The source also mentioned the link between higher education for women and lower birth rates. It's complex.
And that rather stark Ponzi scheme analogy for economies needing constant population growth.
It definitely highlights how our traditional economic models rely on an expanding workforce and consumer base.
But then the discussion brought in robots and AI. could technology change that equation? Maybe make population growth less essential for economic output.
That's the big unknown, isn't it? Can automation truly compensate for fewer workers and consumers in the long run? Or do we still need people?
Immigration policy came up too,
Hmm.
focusing on attracting high-skilled workers, avoiding one-party states being a concern mentioned.
And looking at what other countries are doing, South Korea trying housing support, preschool, cash, a bundle of things.
It suggests you probably need a multi-pronged approach, not just one single incentive.
Seems likely. It's a deep-rooted, complex challenge.
All right, finally, let's touch on AI. Huge potential, right?
Hmm.
The source suggested it could solve massive problems.
Could. But it also noted that humans will probably still find plenty to disagree about, even with AI helping.
True enough. But AI, as this massive driver of economic output,
Hmm.
potentially leading to something like a post-capitalist model with essentially free labor for machines.
It's a mind-bending possibility, but there are downsides too. The risk of electronic warfare Stuxnet was mentioned as an example of that kind of attack.
And just how integrated AI is becoming in our daily lives, our search habits. It's happening fast.
It really is. And the source floated this interesting idea of a future split in society.
Yeah, the transhumans embracing all the tech integration versus the neo-Puritans rejecting it, kind of like The Matrix or that comic Neon Future.
A potential major social divide based on technology adoption. That's a fascinating, maybe slightly scary thought about where we might be headed.
Definitely. So, wrapping this up, we've really covered a spectrum today. U.S.-China trade friction, global power shifts, the Ukraine conflict, demographic worries, the rise of AI.
And the key thing is how interconnected it all is. Trade policy impacts geopolitics, demographics affect economies, technology changes everything. You can't really look at these in isolation.
Absolutely. It underscores the need for critical thinking, for looking at different viewpoints, really trying to understand the cause and effect in a world that feels, well, pretty uncertain and full of competing stories.
Being informed, asking questions, challenging assumptions that feels more important than ever.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on. Looking ahead, which of these huge forces, economic pressures, geopolitical maneuvering, tech breakthroughs like AI, or shifting social values and demographics, which do you think will be the most powerful driver shaping our future, shaping global trade, international relations, how our societies work?
And maybe just as important, what role does your own understanding, your informed perspective, play as we all try to navigate what's coming next?